In this unit, I talk about personal selling. Personal selling is an important part of the IMC promotion mix, along with advertising, public relations, direct marketing, internet marketing, and sales promotion. It's used to help meet customer needs and to sell products. Now, unfortunately, most IMC books devote very little attention to the concept of personal selling, or sometimes they just say things like, well, personal selling is something that larger companies use, and so they're not going to deal with it in their text. And I think that's very misleading to do that. Ask any small business person about the importance of personal selling in their marketing mix, and they'll tell you it's absolutely critical to have selling like that. Go about anywhere on campus, and we look at people that have selling involved as part of their jobs. I was over at the Student Media Center not long ago talking to advertising representatives. Their success of the Daily Mississippian newspaper and the television programs they do is all about the selling that they can do to convince people to advertise in publications. So let's take a look at what selling is. Personal selling can be face-to-face communication, where you actually sit down with a prospect and try to convince them to purchase what you're selling. It could also be face-to-face can also be when you walk into a store and a sales clerk approaches you and says, "May I help you?" Or it can be in a restaurant where the wait staff tries to suggest different menu items to you. Or it can be as simple as a Girl Scout coming to your door selling cookies. Personal selling can also be telemarketing, where the salesperson reaches you on the phone and tries to engage you in conversation. It can be door-to-door selling. You don't see as much of this today as you used to, but especially for kids, the Girl Scouts, the soccer clubs, the things that I mentioned, you do still see it. It can be video conferencing, where you're not actually meeting face-to-face, but you're meeting via an internet connection. It can be internet-enabled links. If you've ever been on a website where you're looking at something and the little picture of a sales representative may pop up and want to know if you need help with anything or if they can suggest something. And it encompasses many other things. Now, the reason personal selling is so important is because it is so big. Estimates say that in the United States, about 5 to 7% of the U.S. population is directly engaged in sales profession. Think of someone you know in sales: real estate agents, stockbrokers, retail sales personnel, college admissions reps, people who are selling cars, insurance agents, small business owners. You have business-to-business sales representatives. In my marketing business, a lot of times people are trying to sell me printing services or different types of paper for projects and things that I do. Or if you've ever been in the doctor's office in the waiting area, and you'll see pharmaceutical sales representatives. Just about every occupation involves some form of selling. Attorneys, financial planners, bankers, advertising agencies, consulting businesses, small business owners. I mean, it's really all around us, and I don't want it to be lost that this isn't an important part of the promotional mix. In some cases, you really don't care that much about the company that you're buying from, but rather about the salesperson that the company represents. If you found a barber or a hairstylist that you really like, you care about working with them, not which company they work for. If they leave and go to a different salon, it's likely that you'll follow them there. You see this in real estate agents, insurance agents, bankers, stockbrokers. You work with the person. You don't care as much about the company that they work for. And a lot of companies struggle with this because they know you care more about the salesperson than they do. So that's why they do what they can to retain the best salespeople, because they know if the salespeople leave, a lot of their customers will too. Sales, unfortunately, is not a very trusted profession. It always ranks near the bottom of the list of professions that you trust. While doctors, police officers, nurses, and teachers might be at the top, usually salespeople, telemarketers, and advertising reps and things, those are near the bottom. Now, much of this distrust of sales has to do with how salespeople are paid. When people are paid on commission, you always have the quandary. Are they selling you what's right for you? Or are they selling you what's right for them? Sometimes companies eliminate commissions and just pay salespeople salaries. But that has challenges too. Because if you're a good salesperson, a top performing person, you will want to work on commissions. And so if your company switches to where you're just on salary, oftentimes you'll leave and go somewhere else where they pay commissions. What that means is the top salespeople will go to other companies. Best Buy, a number of years ago, changed their formula. They had been on a strategy where they paid commission to the sales personnel and realized, among other things, that customers were very distrustful of what was being sold to them. So they switched to a more salary-based model, and it's actually worked out well for them, but not without a lot of pain. Or sometimes companies, when they pay commission, now you have to worry more about ethical things. It's a profession ripe with fraud. I used to see that in the mortgage loan business. There would be a lot of pressure to make a sale, and so the temptation is there to start fudging things and doing things that you might not normally do just to get the commission, because you need to have a paycheck. Let's look at the types of personal selling. The first type of personal selling is an order taker. Usually an order taker it can be a sales clerk, or it can be someone handling inbound telemarketing calls. In other words, this is the type of selling where the salesperson doesn't actually look for the customer. The customer comes to them. I bought a new suit recently. The salesperson was very, very helpful in getting me fitted, but the salesperson didn't come looking for me. I showed up and they were there. Or same thing if you walk into a car dealer. There are a lot of people there trying to help you and trying to sell you. But essentially, you've come there and found them. They haven't found you. People who work at Best Buy or other companies, it's the same situation. Order takers. Or if I call to order a new computer from Dell or Hewlett Packard and I call the company directly, I'll talk with someone who will help me through the process, but I found them. The more traditional type of selling is an order getter. An order getter is where you actually have to identify the customers and go out and find them and then persuade them to buy from you. You need a lot of good selling skills, good product knowledge, and things to be successful in this career. Order getters are not people who sit around and wait for orders. They find the customers. And there's a big difference. And what I'm going to focus on in the rest of this presentation, order getter selling type functions. Let's take a look at the selling process itself. The first step is prospecting. Where are you going to find people who are interested in your product or service? If I ask you as part of this class to go sell something, let's say that I gave you a candy bar or something and said, you must go sell this. What's the first thing you think you would probably do? If you said networking and referrals, that's correct. That's the number one way that people find prospects. Think about it. If I give you the candy bar, are you more apt to stand out in the street trying to sell the candy bar to everyone who walks by or drives by? Probably not, and it probably wouldn't be that effective. You would probably have a tendency to contact people you know. Go talk to your friends. Go talk to your roommates. Perhaps call family members, asking them if they would like to buy. Maybe they would like to buy, but maybe they also have referrals for you. Maybe they say, I'm not hungry, but here's someone you should call. Now that's maybe a silly example, but I'm trying to point out that the natural inclination and the natural way to work this stuff is to work through networking and referrals. That's why good salespeople are very, very well connected in their business. Another way of getting prospects is through direct mail. You can mail out postcards or letters, or maybe it's email, but you're sending things trying to get people to respond to you. And then when they do, you can follow up with them. That keeps it from really being a cold call situation. You're using some other medium to drive your leads. Another way of getting prospects is through trade shows and conventions. I've been to a lot of trade shows in my career, and you have display booths and you're walking around, you're meeting people, but the number one reason you're there is to get prospects, to gather business cards, to meet people, because you know that's where your business is ultimately going to come from. Sometimes it can be as simple as collecting business cards. Small business owners or restaurants or retail establishments often do this, or they try to get you to sign up for an e-newsletter or some sort of promotion in the hopes that they have a name of someone now that they could turn around and prospect with. I mean, if you leave your business card with someone, think about it. You're kind of giving them the signal that it's okay if you want to call me. And then there's cold calling, and it really sucks. Most salespeople at one point or another have to engage in it, but cold calling means you just literally start calling people that you have no affiliation or affinity with. This would be standing out on the street corner selling your candy bars. It can be effective, but it can also be a big waste of time. I know in most businesses I've worked with, we found that the cold calling method really is not an effective way to sell. The most effective way, again, is networking and referrals. The second stage in the selling process is planning. How will you approach the prospect? So once you have a lead, once you have a prospect in mind, you've identified someone that you want to visit with, the question now becomes, how are you going to get in touch with them? Are you going to call them? Are you going to email them to set up an appointment? Are you going to send a letter saying that you're going to call? I see a lot of salespeople do that, and that is a colossal waste of time. In other words, they'll send a letter and say that I'm here's who I am, I'd like to introduce myself, etc., and I'm going to call you on such and such a day to talk about something. Who cares? This is the stage where you also think about what you're going to say in your initial meeting. In a lot of companies, sales presentations are done not just by one individual, but you'll have a team of people. In this situation, you need to figure out who's going to be the lead, who's going to say what. What's appropriate to say? Is this a prospective client where it's appropriate to maybe joke around a little bit, or is it someone you're going to need to get right down to business with? How will you dress? The key is to try to dress very similar to the people that you are meeting with. It would be very awkward, for example, if I were meeting with a prospective client and they were dressed in work clothes. Let's say it was a landscaping company or something, and they were wearing boots and jeans and a shirt and a ball cap, and I'm dressed in a three-piece suit. That would be very awkward. It would be better to try to dress how the prospect was, or maybe one step better. So in other words, if they're in jeans, it would maybe be okay to wear khakis or something like that. Now, I've always felt that men have a little bit more of advantage in something like this because sometimes you're just not sure what to wear. Now, if you can do some reconnaissance beforehand, calling the company or calling someone who works there, or maybe even calling the secretary of the person that you're trying to meet and just asking them what the appropriate attire might be, it could be helpful. But if all else fails, I've been in situations where I can show up and I'll go ahead and wear a suit jacket and a tie. But if I get into the business environment and quickly realize this is too overdressed, I can pull the tie off and shed the jacket, maybe roll up the sleeves, and take my formal business attire and make it look much more casual. I think females are probably a little bit more challenged in how they can transform things like this. I'd like to hear your ideas on that if you have any. But reconnaissance is key. It's trying to find out as much as you can about the prospect before you meet. Where did they go to school? What's their background? Check them out on LinkedIn. Try to find as much information as you can so when you finally meet them, you have some basis for the conversation. The third part of the selling process, or step number 3, is the approach. What do you do at the very start of your sales pitch? So you've done your prospecting, you've set up an appointment, you've kind of planned what it is you're doing. Now you're actually meeting the person for the first time. There are all kinds of studies that say that people have opinions of you usually within the first 30 seconds to a minute of meeting you. And that's very, very true. Think of your opinions of others you meet or professors that you meet for the first time and things. We form opinions very quickly. Well, when you're in a selling situation, the people that you're trying to sell to, they're forming opinions of you quickly like that as well. So you need to plan to make sure that things go well. Usually when you first meet someone, you want to build a rapport. If you've done your reconnaissance, you know some of their dislikes and some of their likes and can maybe broach that. If you know where they went to school or what teams they like or what hobbies or what sports they engage in, that's a good icebreaker. Maybe you can look around their office. Maybe there's plaques on the wall, pictures or awards or things. Hey, I see you're an Old Miss fan. I visited their campus once. Maybe you could say something like that for someone that you know is, for example, an Old Miss graduate or something. Or if you have mutual friends or are introduced or set up by someone through the networking and referral process, you can mention that so-and-so referred me to you. How do you know them? Now, I want to just interject here that we're talking about the selling process and as part of IMC, but these concepts work really well for selling yourself in other situations as well. For example, job interviewing and the job process, where the product is really yourself that you're trying to sell. But the goal of this third stage is to try to get off on the right foot. Try to make things comfortable. Figure out what the small talk should be. There are all kinds of studies and things that show, too, that you can evaluate a person and their demeanor by looking around their office. I've been ushered into offices before, and there are pictures of that person all over the wall. Pictures of them winning awards, pictures of them with their family, pictures of them out on the golf course. Might be a clue that that person likes to talk of themselves, has an ego. Might be a good way to broach things. Sometimes I've been ushered into offices where they're very, very organized. Every piece of paper is neatly stacked on the desk. I remember one sales presentation I had where the lady that I was working to sell things with had about a half a dozen yellow number 2 pencils all sharpened and lined up in a little row on her desk. You can make some assumptions about a person's behavior and mannerisms when you see things like that and adjust your manners accordingly. If they usher you into the office, if you're seated across from their desk, that's a different feeling than if they pull up a chair and sit next beside you. If they're looking at their watch, that's a clue this person needs to keep on schedule, etc., etc. But once you get past the small talk, the real reason you're there must be, you must get to that. It's the presentation. What information do you want to convey? What is it you're trying to sell? Most people rehearse their presentations or at least give a lot of thought to what it is that they're going to say before they get to this situation. There are really 2 main types of ways that you can deliver your information. The first one is formula selling, or some people call this the canned presentation or the script. This is where you have the PowerPoint, perhaps, or you have a folder or a booklet, and you walk through. Here's the first thing I want to talk to you about. Here's the second thing I want to talk to you about. It's an easier form of presenting information because if you can memorize a script, you can perhaps do well with it. The big risk, however, is droning on about something that the prospect is not interested in. Have you ever been in a situation where a salesperson approaches you and begins talking about something that you're not that interested in? And it's because they haven't really taken the time to ask what your needs are. You might be looking at a new computer in a store, for example, and they start talking about the great warranty program, great warranties of these computers. Or if you're looking at a car, they might talk about the special financing options that they have, not really understanding whether financing itself is something that's going to appeal to you or not. That's the problem with the formula selling process. The better approach is the need satisfaction, or NSS approach. This is where, in my opinion, this is certainly the best one, and it's where you're asking a lot of questions. Your presentation is based on probing and mostly listening. A good rule of thumb is for the salesperson to do about 20% of the talking and try to get the prospect to talk about 80% of the time, because that's where you're going to discover what their needs are. You listen and you address things that are especially relevant to them. I met with a company one time, and in the conversation with them realized that what they were telling me essentially was that their marketing department of this big corporation that was based in Dallas, they said that they laid off most of the marketing department and were retooling some things. I began asking a lot of questions about that. Who does your marketing currently? What types of things do you need to do? What kind of resources are you looking for? And ended up having a successful sale with the consulting business because I was able to ask the right questions. In need satisfaction selling, try not to ask close-ended questions. Always ask open-ended questions. Don't say, do you need any marketing help? But say, tell me about the resources you currently have with your marketing efforts. The next step of the selling process is closing the sale. They say yes. They sign on the dotted line. You've negotiated the contract. They give you the payment. They sign the lease, whatever it is. The person has indicated that they're making the sale, and this is where most people think, well, it must be a 5-step process. Step number 5, close the sale. But wait, there's more. The final step is really follow-up after the sale. Remember that I said that the most effective way of generating business from sales is through networking and referrals? Well, what you should be doing with customers that you have successfully sold to in the past is asking them for their ideas, their referrals. Hey, I appreciate you purchasing this from me. I look forward to the start of a great relationship. Let me ask you this. Is there anybody else in your organization or that you know outside of your organization that I should talk to that might be interested in my services or what I'm doing? Often you'll be surprised at the leads and referrals you'll get from here. So if you drew this sales process out, it wouldn't be linear. It would be more of a circle. The follow-up after the sale leads right back up into the networking and the referrals portion of it. Now, a couple of things that I'm just sitting here thinking of. Sometimes sales meetings happen in places that are not an office. For example, over lunch somewhere in a restaurant. That can present some unique challenges. Number one, you don't have any basis for knowing what the person's office might look like or ascertaining what kind of personality they have by looking at that. But there's also some challenges sometimes in knowing exactly how to proceed with a sales presentation over lunch. Couple rules of thumb. First of all, you are not there to eat. The venue might be a restaurant. It might be lunch. If you need to eat beforehand, though, so that you're not starving, or if you need to wait till afterwards, that's fine. You still order off the menu, of course, and eat something. But the point is, you don't worry about getting what sounds good to you. You worry about getting what would probably be the best thing to have given the situation. If you're wearing a white shirt, don't order the spaghetti, even if the spaghetti sounds good. Sometimes salads can be challenging to eat, or certain messy foods. Remember, get the food that is going to be the easiest to eat. Another thing is the awkwardness in knowing when exactly to turn the conversation from the introductory part of it to the actual presentation itself. A good rule of thumb is do that after the dinner has been ordered, but before the meal arrives. When you first sit down, there's the small talk and looking at what you want on the menu and the interruptions by the wait staff. But if as soon as the orders are placed, that's a good time to try to turn to the sales presentation before the food begins arriving, and before, and because after it arrives, then people are eating and it becomes more of a distraction. So there's a small window of opportunity there where it can be very effective to begin the presentation. Now I just want to talk a little bit about handling objections. Objections are things that prospects will say to you that indicate that they're not interested or they don't want to buy. If you're not a very good salesperson, when someone tells you no, you move on and think, well, I've got my answer, they're not going to buy. But a good salesperson, no is just another step on the way to yes. It's perseverance and tenacity that matters. Let's look at some of the common objections you might get in a sales call and how you might acknowledge them. The first objection is simply acknowledging it. For these next few slides, I'm going to set up an example. Let's say that I am a college admissions representative for Ole Miss, and so I'm meeting with parents or a student, talking to them and trying to convince them to come to Ole Miss. And let's say that the objection that they mention is cost. Well, Ole Miss is more expensive than the community colleges. So when they say that, they've thrown up an objection. They are saying that cost might be an issue here. There are several ways to handle it. One of them is to acknowledge the objection and to justify it. So if they tell you that, you could say, yes, our tuition is higher than the community colleges, but let me tell you about the great professors that we've got here that we're able to hire and the great value that you get for your money. So you're agreeing with them that cost is an issue, but you're trying to point out the value that you're getting for the money that you're spending. Another approach would be to accept the objection. If someone says, well, the college is Ole Miss is expensive, I'm not able to afford it, one response might be, yeah, you're correct, we're not for everyone. If you can do something like that tactfully, you can also kind of create the image, create the persona that this is a more exclusive place that, yeah, you're right, not everybody can be here. It might actually, kind of plant the seed for them wanting to make sure that they get there. Now, I'm totally generalizations here. And perhaps this is a silly example, but I'm just trying to point out really what the, how you handle the objection and what the objection would be. Perhaps another way to handle it would be postponing the objection. This is a good strategy because it gives you time to think. If someone says, well, I'm concerned about the tuition cost, what you could say is, I completely understand that tuition is an important part of your consideration on where you're choosing to go to school, but let's come back to that later. Let's talk about some other things first. Because number one, that gives you a chance to kind of be thinking about how you're going to approach the objective, but it also gives you a chance to maybe in the time to visit about some other things that get the prospects really excited, and maybe they'll be sold on the decision that they have to make without really coming back to the cost issue. So postponing is one strategy. Another strategy, you have to be careful with this one, but is deny the objection. If your prospect says something that is not true, again, you have to be careful with this one, but you could point it out to them. Let's say someone says, well, Ole Miss is the most expensive of state colleges in Mississippi. If you know that that's not the case, you could actually point out and say, well, no, that's actually not true. Let me share with you the information and show you where we rank in relation to some of the other universities and things. Sometimes salespeople will try to ignore an objection. Let's not talk about tuition. I'm here to show you the campus. Let's go out and look around and things like that. Now again, you have to be very careful of that and kind of weigh the situation, but that can be a strategy that some people use. The best way of handling an objection, in my view, is to ask and clarify. Asking someone, why is that important to you? Or, is that your primary concern? If they ask about the tuition, I say, is tuition the number one criteria that you use in picking out a college? Where else have you looked? And how does Ole Miss compare to the tuition at those institutions? Will you be paying for your college tuition, or do you have an employer, or do you have scholarships or things? What you're trying to get at is to really clarify, because what you don't know, that might not really be a big objection. It might just be something that they lobbed out. So you're trying to probe and trying to see, is this a barrier to making the sale, or is this something that we easily maneuver around? And you just don't know until you do that. There was one time when I had first begun my consulting business, and I didn't have any clients. I had a dream, had some ideas, had a lot of leads, but didn't have any clients yet. And there was one question I didn't want to get from a prospect, and that was, how many clients do you have? Because it felt wrong, and it was embarrassing, quite honestly, to say, well, I don't have any, you'd be my first. And so I worked very hard to figure out how to maneuver around that objection should it come up, and learned I could talk about my experience in marketing many things. Besides the company that I'm starting, I've got years and years of marketing experience, and here's all the things I've done and the people I've worked with, and trying to build up the fact and make it appear that I wasn't going to lie and say I didn't have any clients, but I wanted to create the appearance that I work with a lot of people. But I was in a situation one time, was asked that question, did my little song and dance, and then realized what was going on. The prospective client I was talking to had recently worked with a big ad agency and were very frustrated that they felt like they were one of many dozen clients. They felt like they didn't get personal attention. They felt like they were just a number, and they were looking to work with a firm that had very few clients. And here I was trying to sell them on the fact that I had a lot of clients. The problem was I didn't understand where they were coming from. I didn't ask and clarify. Whenever someone asks you a question, it's fair game to try to turn it around and ask a question back so you can clarify exactly what they're trying to get at. Trying to answer a question with a question can be an art. But if someone asks me my hourly consulting rate, if I tell them it's $110 an hour, I could really shoot myself in the foot. What if they work with someone now that charges $90 an hour? All of a sudden, I've just set a price that comes in at above what they're paying, and that might be the end of the conversation. The better way to answer that would be, is that the thing that's most important to you in making a decision? Or I could ask them if they have experience paying hourly rates to other firms. Or I could ask them if they prefer to pay hourly, or if they're ever interested in talking about retainer type relationships or other things. So when someone asks the question, make sure you understand what they're asking. Again, these things can be tips, not just for the selling process of integrated marketing communications, but in getting jobs and other things in life. That concludes this unit.